Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, you guys are in for a very big treat today. Right now, you are looking at one of the best apologists on planet Earth. You're also looking at my guest, the other Paul, and who's also pretty darn good. And yeah, so today we are going to, as the title said, we're going to discuss why he chose the Book of Common Prayer over the NOUS. Translation.
That's right.
Why he chose Anglicanism over the Eastern Orthodox Church. We all know why he didn't want to become Catholic. He couldn't find enough Newman to put over the holes. But why didn't he go Eastern? Why didn't he go to Easternism? They have, the sacraments. They don't have Pope Francis, which is right now a huge plus. But no, he decided to go Anglican. And so Paul, how are you doing? How are things down under?
Mate, it is a beautiful Australian morning right now. I am loving my time. I'm vibing. I'm between work days, so going back to work tomorrow. So this is a great time and opportunity to finally come on your channel. Did I come on your channel before? Or was that you with me? I think that was on my channel.
We've done both. You came on mine.
Okay,
and we had you do a response to the Jewish oral law, which we
that's it. Yes, that's it. That was good.
And then I came on your channel to talk about the Crusades.
That's it. Yeah. Those are both very, very good. So finally happening again. Loving it.
Yeah,
loving the opportunity. Yeah.
When you came on the first time, I asked you what church you were currently going to, and you were kind of like in limbo, like kind of like searching, feeling things out. But you told me that you had been brought up in a like kind of a Pentecostal background with some Calvinist leanings, and then I can't exactly recall when. A few months ago, I was watching a live stream of yours, and Father James was in the chat, and he's like, "Tell everyone," and then it's like, and then you're like, "Okay, I've decided to make the Anglican Church my home in Christ," and that's what we're here to talk about. So, now, trying to figure out where to begin. Well, perhaps you can take it off where you want, and I'll chime in here and there.
Sorry, say that again.
So, okay. So you did. What made you decide to go Anglican? Like, what do they have that the Eastern Orthodox Church currently lacks?
Right. Well, first, the main thing for going Anglican was that it really wasn't an active choice to say, I like Anglican theology, so I'm going to go that way. It was with the lockdowns here in Australia in particular, it was bad just trying to find a church that was open. And that was pretty much everybody. Once that finally subsided, I was still looking for a decent church family. And my ideal choice was actually going to be like a traditional Presbyterian one, because I like that. But eventually, just purely providentially, oh wow, John Colarafi's in the chat. How good! Providentially, I was at a Roman Catholic friends party, and not like just some I was baptized Catholic, but like seriously committed and all that, and a bunch of Roman Catholic friends there. But I was talking with one of my other Catholic friends there, like pretty much just general Protestant Catholic stuff. And then there was this girl there. I say girl, but she's like a little bit older than me. And she's like, "Hey, I'm gonna kind of slide into this conversation because this is interesting to me." And you might not like this, but she's saying, "Look, I'm born and raised Catholic. I still go to mass, but I kind of question some of Rome's teachings. So I'm also going to an Anglican church at the same time." And so I ask her, "Oh, where's this?" And she tells me, redacted, no doxing. And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's actually really nearby me." And when I looked it up, I realized it was this fancy church building near me that, like, it just looked like a heritage site. I never actually considered it's actually an active church. So I decided to visit there one day, and I like, you know what? I love it. It's Anglican. Cool. No problems with that. So 100%, I'm going to go down there. And it's really only after that I've started to look more into Anglican theology, and to my joy, it's fantastic stuff. Love it. So now I happily happily identify as Anglican. Love me 39 Articles. Love me formularies, simple as. And so that's pretty much that. Now, with as Craig himself says in the chat, I never really like actively discerned Eastern Orthodoxy, although I have for a while been in interaction with it, whether reading with their sources or with those who are very well entrenched in them, like Craig and some others. And of course I've come out the other end and I'm saying, yeah, no, I'm not really buying it. And so not that I've really actively said to myself, why did I choose Anglican over Eastern Orthodoxy? But really, as an after the fact observation, like a lot of the reasons for not going Eastern Orthodox are reasons that I share for why I don't go Roman Catholic. So stuff like certain dogmas, like the Seventh Council of Nicaea, although like the East much more plays that up than the West in my experience. Although you guys both accept it, of course. So and I think that council and their teachings are just So I can't. It'd be one thing if they just kind of like a lot of the people believed it, but it's another thing to like actively enforce it on the whole church. And I'm just like, no, thank you, I don't like that. Yeah, me and my private judgment. Let's go. But so that other doctrinal issues that I share as problematic with Rome, but I guess particular issues with the East. There's not as many as with Rome, because Rome does make, I think, just numerically much more claims, which ironically when we get to it, will come to one thing which I see as a big advantage of Rome and a unique problem with the East. But one of these reasons would definitely have to do with, for one, let's say, with many Eastern church, with so many I see in Eastern communities, is how like ethnocentric they are. Which there's nothing wrong with a church that's just, hey, look, it's for us people of this culture and language, where we're servicing them. Yeah, cool, no problem. But with the East, there is a particular blight of ethnocentrism that is a big problem. That alone can't be a turnoff, but it is a big factor. But another one will be that while the East does technically have a central magisterial authority of some sort, it is, in my judgment, it is all over the joint. Like, where do you go to? Where do you point to? Like with Rome, notwithstanding the truth of the fact, with Rome, you can say, oh, look, the Pope. And like whether it's a statement from the Pope or the fact that a Pope can call an ecumenical council, it's there. You can identify, you can point to it. Like the Pope can just wake up in the morning one day and say, I feel like an ecumenical council today. Let's invite all the boys over. Let's have one. Whereas with the East, you can't do that. And I think I even remember an article from Craig Trulia where he gave an honest assessment where, look, our canon law says, among other things, that you need the Roman emperor to call an ecumenical council. And do correct me if I'm wrong, Craig. I read it a while ago, but I do remember that sticking out to me. And because they haven't really had the opportunity to change that, since there's no more an emperor of Rome, they can't call an ecumenical council. And then the other prerogative of how in their canon law it requires, and a council does require the approval of Rome, although I think some authors will point to, I forgot where that canon was, but basically the one where it says that the prerogatives of old Rome go over to new Rome, so maybe they can have a thing for that. But with the Roman emperor, I don't think so. And so, and there you go. So the Craig himself says in the chat, you need a pope to synodically receive a council. And so the East is not able to do that from what I've seen. And so that's why the most you'll really get is stuff like pan-Orthodox synods. And to me, that's a huge problem, because whereas Rome can at least claim, in the abstract at least, that they can continue on the fullness of the organs of the church, the East really can't. And I think that's a big problem because like Rome, they'll make claims about how the church has these powers invested by Christ, indefectibility, Christ will always be with it. And that leads to, and the ultimate expression of that is the ecumenical council. But that's the big problem. They can't call an ecumenical council. They can't exercise that ultimate organ of the indefectibility and the authority of the church. And I know, and Craig's saying in the chat that Rome technically can't, but at least Rome, I'm just saying it as like a basic abstract. At least Rome claims and has arguments, whether they're right or not, for why they can cause an ecumenical council. So in that basic sense, they can. But the East itself more or less admits that they can't, that they can't do it. And I don't want to be responding to Craig in the chat the entire time. So last one, I know the ecumenical council is not the only means of magisterial authority, but it is the ultimate one. And I think that's a big problem when your own communion basically admits that you can't do it. And so I think that's a very unique problem with the East that really turns me off.
Let me chime in here for a second, because I think I agree with you to a certain extent. Like, that's, in my opinion, that's a problem that specifically the I guess Eastern and Oriental have. But like a thing that a lot of Eastern Orthodox like to say is, well, look, in the 1300s we had the issue with Barlium and Polemos, and we managed to solve that pretty clearly. We didn't need the Pope, didn't need an ecumenical council. We just had some local synods and the Emperor and Polemos, and it's done.
To which I'd simply say, well, okay, can you guys do the same for your current Moscow, Constantinople problems, and
yeah, that's what
among other things? I mean, I think that issue alone is one where either an ecumenical council or something akin to a pope would be quite useful, in my opinion, because there is, and I'm not saying that you can't come to an answer, but at minimum, there is a lot of problems and questions you have to go through to see, well, who's on the right side of the Moscow Constantinople stuff, like who's and of course there's the whole partial communion thing, which I'm actually sympathetic for, where like two guys, they communicate each other but they're in communion with other guys or in communion with each other, so there's some kind of linkage there. I'm like, yeah, there's some legitimacy to that. But the nature and the scale of these splits really does, in my opinion, throw a fundamental spanner in the works with the claims of the unity of the East, and thus to be like the one undivided church. Like, you can claim that in the abstract all you want, but what we see in the real world, in my opinion, is just not there. It really isn't.
Okay, now something that I could point out, you said that's an area where the Catholic has an advantage. Now, keep in mind, you didn't go Catholic, though. You picked Anglican, and Anglican does not have a pope either. So, I mean, sure, there's a problem with the East. They don't have the pope. They don't have a central authority, but the Anglican Church does not either. Explain.
Yes, and that's why I qualified it as this being a problem because of what the East claims about herself. So the East has very, very high claims about we're the one true church, undivided. We have this magisterial power granted to us by Christ herself, the power to call, at least originally, an ecumenical council and all that. And in light of those claims, the East disunity is a big problem. Like with an Anglican polity, and we do have massive disputes and splits happening right now, which in my view and in a wider Anglican view, at least for those on my side of the issue, it's a good thing that there are big splits happening, like away from the corrupt, from many of the corrupt bodies and people, bishops and that, basically starting new things. Like only recently, for example, in Australia, the Diocese of the Southern Cross was recently founded, and the former Archbishop of Sydney, Glenn Davies, was put at the helm of it as the bishop there, at least for a little bit. And it's basically a non-geographical diocese across Australia where parishes under the rule of apostate bishops, primarily on the question of same-sex marriage, if they withdraw from there, they can come under a new diocese. So they can still remain in some sense under an Anglican communion, just not under the tyranny of an apostate bishop. So we have that, and that's a great thing.
Of the modernists. So I'm going to, like, you talked about homosexual quote unquote marriage. Does your Anglican group have female clergy?
No, we don't.
Thank God. Oh, thank God.
Yeah. Where I am, because the thing with Anglican polity, and I think its greatest strength, is its basic, somewhat Cyprianic ecclesiology, where the bishop and the archbishops, they are the fundamental centers of authority. So there's a lot of autonomy. Obviously, we say that we're Anglican, so we abide by the Anglican formularies and that, and there's basically unity in that respect. But ultimately, the power of governance relies in the local bishop, which is great, because if there's corruption in a wide scale, whether with a lot of bishops or even in a central authority, like we have our Lambeth conferences every few years, which is functionally the universal magisterium of the Anglican Church. If something crap happens with the Anglican with the Lambeth conference, it doesn't have to spread to all the bishops. The local good bishops can exercise their power and say, "No, we're not going to do that," which is great. And so in that respect, the Sydney Anglican Archdiocese is very good on these issues. We've said, yeah, no way, none of this same-sex marriage crap. And as far as I'm aware, Sydney does not have female priests or we don't have female bishops. We don't. And as far as I'm aware, we don't have female priests, although it's possible there could be some rogue parish somewhere that does. Although female deacons are tolerated. And that issue, I'm against female deacons, but that issue I don't think is as big of an error. It's not a deal breaker for me, because the nature of shepherd and fatherhood is something that's applied to bishops / presbyters / priests. And so if that's to be violated with a female clergy, that'd be a big problem, and I would not attend that church. But with deacons, it's to a much lesser extent, where I still think it's an error, because scripture is very, very clear on that, in my opinion. But it's not going to be a deal breaker for me. So so there's divisions in the Anglican Communion, and it's bad. It's very bad in a practical sense. But by God's grace, it's not a deal breaker, because in the end, the local community, the local communion can get its own act together, even if the whole world around them falls apart.
So is the other, just quickly, is the other Paul really Anglican? I thought he was a Baptist.
I am straight up.
Okay, so I've got a criticism. So if you seen Dr. Jordan Cooper's video on why he can't go Anglican?
I have, and I think from what I remember Father James did a response to that as well. But a lot of his criticisms when I watched it, and Father James pointed out as well, were pretty much all centered specifically on the ACNA, which is interesting, because the ACNA is like one specific group in one country out of the whole Anglican Communion. So that was interesting. I forgot exactly all of his criticisms though.
Well, he said it's too flexible. Like if you're a traditional Lutheran, it's very laid out what you believe. But if someone says, I'm a traditional Anglican, you could be a low church, a high church, or a subset of each. Like for example, I think amongst Anglicans, in terms of the Eucharist, you got everything from Zwinglian spiritual presence, some kind of real presence, all the way up to almost transubstantiation, although not quite. So like it's a range, and it's not only a Eucharist. You could say it about a few other things as well. I think that's what Cooper was getting at there.
Yeah, and to which I'd simply say, I'm trying to put words to it, but basically, it kind of, to make that an issue, you kind of have to assume that this would be an issue. And I do get that certain Anglo-Catholics would say that a lower Eucharistology, quote unquote, would be a problem. Although I personally simply say, at least with my view, and of course conflict of interest, because I am a bit of a lower Eucharistology myself, probably closer. I say Zwingli a lot, but the more I read, the more it looks like I'm pretty much a Calvinist view, which thankfully Father James, he himself says that's the bare minimum acceptable. So thank you, Father James. Very cool. I'm approved.
You've met the threshold.
That's it. I met the threshold of a true Anglican. But you basically have to assume, for that to be a problem, you basically have to assume that unity, that precise unity on a certain issue is necessary. And really, we could just throw that right back. Really, he's kind of saying, oh, look, traditional Lutheranism, that's defined and all that stuff. Okay, cool. But why can't I just say that traditional Anglicanism is defined? Because then I could throw the same thing back at him to say, well, what about these guys? These guys claim to be true Lutherans, but they're they're off the bloody charts. You know, like if you're thinking about the what is it, the LCMS, I think, for example, or even just others who aren't like absolutely crazy liberals or whatever. They claim to be a traditional Lutheran, but then they're a bit more lax in issues. And Jordan Cooper will ultimately say, oh, look, well, no, that they can't do that because we have our own Book of Concord, which defines these things. And if you're in adherence to them, you're a traditional Lutheran. I need only say the same thing. We have our formularies. If you're in coherence with them, you're a traditional Anglican. Doesn't matter how many other people are out there who claim to be Anglican or specifically traditional Anglican, yet go against them. Doesn't matter. We have a standard. We have a definition.
Well, and like the first thing I thought when I heard Cooper do that that criticism is, if you take a look at a Lutheran in Germany versus a Lutheran in Scandinavia, they got the different ecclesiologies there. So like now, like both in Germany and in Scandinavia, they both gone rank modernist female clergy, stuff like that. But back a couple hundred years back, like they got the 3-tiered episcopacy, similar to the Anglicans and the Catholics and Orthodox in Scandinavia. But you go down to Germany, they don't have that, right? So I mean, it's not like everything is clear cut over there either. But
yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So do you think Orthodox theology is pretty unified, or is it too lax, or his thoughts on that?
Yeah, and obviously, admittedly, I'm not expert level with my reading on this, but that is another unique criticism I have with the East, where with the West, you have diversity of views, that's true, but you have such a voluminous output with very precise language and discussion on many issues where you can really, really get a very, very close, very precise thing at look at least what specific authors, if not entire councils and such, at what they believe. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff there where you can really get a lot of clarity. But in my experience, a lot of reading with Orthodox material, even like dogmatic stuff, you don't get that same level of precision, and that's not always necessary. That can be fine. And even with like, especially like a devotional kind of work, for example, or a homily, that can be acceptable, where you kind of sacrifice detail for the sake of just getting the gist across. But there is a large trend in what I see where there's much less precision theologically in the East, to the point where there can be a lot of avoidable confusion in what they say. And I know Craig will probably get a little bit upset with me, but like I think even looking at certain like Marian hymns, for example, where they'll have such high language, which just on the face of it is blasphemous, like calling Mary our salvation, among other things. But then you'll hear an Orthodox guy somewhere else just say, oh no, but we only mean that in respect to her being a vessel and all that. And to which I say, well, why don't you just make that clear? Why don't you just not use such language that clearly just reading it as it is blasphemous? And granted, I can say the same thing about the West, but at least with the West, there's a lot more precise discussion about the nature of these things, which I still ultimately disagree with. But with the East, that's so much more lacking, and it does, I believe, create a lot of unnecessary confusion where you'll see online author bros, they'll say, come to Orthodoxy, we have the truth, blah, 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 this is the truth, this is what we claim. Only for another author bro to come out of left field to say, oh, no, you're wrong on this issue. And then they'll say, oh, no, you're wrong, blah, 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 blah. And they kind of go at each other. And then it kind of confounds again with the problem of a real lack of central establishing of the facts of the matter, where it just kind of, everyone's just kind of left to their own devices on like, what's the truth of this issue? How do we dogmatically define it? So it all just kind of compounds together to basically create a hot mess in a way that Rome is not. Now, I do believe Rome has a big mess at the moment. I really do. And that it could even be fatal to their claims, but not in such a way where the East is particularly rife with this, I believe.
Okay. And like you said earlier, you'd acknowledge there's some of this from in the Anglican communion, but it's off the hook because you don't make the firm claims that they make, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Now, in your personal life, not online, not on Twitter, not on YouTube, not on Discord, but in your personal life, are most of the Eastern Orthodox people you know cradle or convert?
Ooh, that's a good question. I
Or a
don't
combo?
know a big bunch outside of the internet. Um, well, just to say with the internet, a lot of them are converts. And then maybe I know some cradles, but like it's a pretty small amount. Which I think that makes sense because we're in the West and Orthodoxy's never really been a big thing. And so proportionally speaking, a lot more are going to be converts. Now, as to real life, I'm actually trying to think of a non. Actually, no. I think I do. I think I do know a couple of non-convert Orthodox in my life, but like there's so few Orthodox to begin with in my real life that I know. Compared with Roman Catholics, I know a lot of them here in Sydney, and even in Melbourne. But yeah, as to Orthodox, I can't really say because I know very few to begin with
Like
in the real world. In the real world,
for me, like all the ones I know personally are all cradle, like are all
mm.
cradle, and they're all Russian too. I don't know any Greeks but they all go to the Russian church. They're like my friend Retachka's from Belarus. You know, I got some friends. My friend Mariana, Masha, both from Ukraine. I know a few from Kazakhstan, and like because like I speak Russian, so like I'm part of that community in my city. So and like the vast majority of them are at least baptized in the Orthodox Church. Obviously,
Mm.
they're largely lapsed. Um,
Mm.
but I do have a few friends who go. I got a friend who stopped going. It's kind of sad because she became like new age. Uh,
Rip.
yeah, no, it's sad, you know, because her family was pretty traditional. An Orthodox family, a cradle Orthodox family with 6 kids. Like that
Mm.
is that's you come to Latin mass. That's like the average amount of kids, but okay. There's a question here. I assume this is meant for the other Paul. Are you allowed to
Mm.
pray to saints in Anglicanism? And if so, would you unironically pray to Martin Luther?
I haven't fully parsed the formularies, so I can't say for certain, but I do know that on the Anglo-Catholic side there are those that do. Some of them, like Father James, will be in a good way restrictive about it, like just asking the saint to pray for us, which I think is like that's like the most acceptable quote unquote thing of that practice, although I'm still personally against it, but I can at least see a more justifiable rationale for it. So at least in that respect, as far as I haven't seen, I can't say for certain. I haven't seen what all the formularies say about this issue, but given the presence of very well entrenched Anglo Catholics who do this stuff, I'm gonna presume that there probably isn't something specific about it. Although clearly the wider Protestant worldview, which I would argue, I guess, undergirds Anglicanism, does go against it. So I can't say for certain, although I do know that there is probably a minority that do. There is which probably is a minority that
Okay,
do such, but
so
at
it's
least
something
much
you're
more
still
restricted.
so it's like something you're still trying to figure out then.
Mhm.
Okay, quick question here. Is the other Paul low church?
So in terms of where I go, and again, no doxing. They are a bit more low church, although they do have a traditional morning prayer service that I like to go to. Although even that, from what I learned from the past few years, has been stripped back quite a bit, which I personally don't like. Like in terms of what I want, I would love a full on smells and bells morning prayer, all that stuff. I'm all for that all the way. Otherwise, though, there's other services in the day. I also go to a more contemporary evening service, but it's not like a Hillsong rock concert with like light shows and smoke machines and that. It's pretty basic, like with the band and all that. And even then, they have a basic structure and reverence with it. So I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. Although I do think that the ideal, if one can get it, if it's practically possible, there should be a high church liturgical mode of worship. So in that respect, I'm not low church. I'm fine with it. I don't think it's illicit or anything. But I do believe that like a high church liturgical tradition is the best and it should be strived for.
All right, now we're going to talk about the F word. Do you know what the F word is?
Phronema. Well, it's the
No, that's
PH
the
word.
PH word. The filioque. The filioque.
Oh, the filioque.
Okay, so so the of course the Orthodox Church can condemn it to the nth degree. Huge sin to believe in the filioque. Um, I mean, as far as I know, when I mean historically, when the Anglican Church uh broke off from the Catholic Church, they kept that part. Now I know there's been certain revisionist movements and all that stuff. Where do you stand on the filioque?
Yeah, the filioque. I've been a bit more direct in the past, where I'd say that I just don't believe in the filioque, which is an interesting thing, and ironically something I do share with the East. But I'm more so like to say now that it's just not an issue I'm really fussed with. Like, and I think that is a big problem of like the imperial churches of Rome and the East. But I think in particular, I guess with how fervently they go with the East, where it is such like, if you don't believe it, you're anathema and all that. And I just think it's one of those. I think it's one of those issues where it's like, you do affirm the filioque or you don't. Okay, whatever. I don't really care, and it shouldn't matter in my opinion, unless you want to get into like really precise metaphysical discussions. Which, let's be real, that's not the Christian life per se. So on that issue, I don't affirm it. I do think I do see more sense in the Eastern view of a soul principle of the Father, and I know that many on Rome's side will say, well, we do believe that, and that's just the Father goes through the Son. So I won't say more on that, except to say for people to check out the doco in production that I have with Craig Trulia, which is going to address this issue. but yeah, apart from that, it's just like I just don't really care a whole ton. Although on the issue itself, I personally don't believe it, and so sometimes in morning prayer, usually in morning prayer, we'll either say the Apostles' Creed, which doesn't have any mention of that, or we'll say the Nicene Creed with the filioque in it. And then so often in morning prayer, when I'm there, we're saying it, I'll say, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. So that's kind of an interesting moment in morning prayer for me when it comes up.
Okay, so it's generally accepted at your church, but you know, it's probably kind of like optional to
Can you bring up Drocknar's comment? Filioque entails modalism and ditheism.
Okay, that's what
and atheism. That's a beautiful segue, because that is another unique problem I have with the East, where they are much more militant with how like these super fine metaphysical, your position on these super fine metaphysical issues. That leads to atheism, or the filioque caused abortion. And I think it's a really, from what I see, it is quite a common attitude in Orthodoxy, which I think is just, in my opinion, a joke. Like it really is, in my opinion. And I just love the meme. I just love the meme of it. Like, I want to get, those like multicolored prize spinning wheel things that have like a little clicker and it stops on an option in that. I want to buy one of those and just write various ancient heresies in it. So like, if an author or whoever comes up to me like, this thing leads to this heresy, like invisible church is Nestorianism, I'm be like, okay, let's bring out the heresy wheel, boys, and just spin it along and pick out what heresy we're guilty of today. so I think that is a massive problem with the East, with just how I'm gonna be real, with how autistic they can get with theological particulars, and really not just, and that's not just a thing where that's just a common problem, but it's not magisterially defined, so it's technically okay. That's something I believe happens at the magisterial level with the East, and which is why it's a big no. I can't assent to that, because you guys are making literal mountains out of molehills. So and the filioque is one of those. Like, I don't affirm it, but if someone I know does, okay, you still have all else being equal, you still have the fullness of faith. I don't really care a whole time.
But the big question is, do they have the nous?
Ooh. The nous. Do they have the nous, boys?
Okay,
dear.
so no, that's good. I'm glad we came to that. Oh, by the way, guys, today on Sam Shamoon's channel, Cobain was on, and he gave an Orthodox presentation against a filioque. It was very intelligent. It's not like cheap, low level polemics, but no, he gave it's probably the best explanation of the Orthodox position I've ever heard. I mean, yeah, so just go check that out. Okay, so a thing I know that you have a huge hang up with, and you briefly talked about this, but we're going to go into some more detail, is the Seventh Council and its theology of icons. Like that, like 100%. In fact, you had a live stream with Craig Truly a couple weeks back, and I asked, what do you think was the biggest blunder of the church fathers? And you said iconodulia, which kind of culminates in the Second Council of Nicaea in the 700s. So yeah, talk a bit more about that, and what's the Anglican view?
Yeah, that's right. So this is one of those issues where it's technically a shared issue with Rome and the East, and so there's only a few unique issues with the East which aren't, at least not directly, shared by Rome, and so that's why it's kind of like not a whole ton, although there's still real things that ultimately cause me not to go East. But otherwise, if we include issues that Rome and the East technically share, got a laundry list right there. And Rome does accept the Seventh Council, but even then there is, I think, a unique issue with the East where Rome, at least in some respect, again, whether it's legitimate or not, they'll at least accept that things took time historically to develop. And so you'll have not even necessarily going the full route of Newman, but many Roman Catholics who will happily say that, hey, iconodulia and the both the theology and the practice itself took time to come out. It wasn't always there from the beginning of the apostles. That's cool. And so I'm like, hey, big respect to you guys for that. I think that does cause some problems, but whatever. That's actually a point in your direction. But then with the East, they'll claim that many of them, at least, and I believe at least in the traditional belief, that all these things which we believe, iconodulia and such, it goes all the way back to the apostles. Like, it was there. And I think when you look at history, no, it's not. It's clearly not. It's one of those issues where the silence is so deafening that if you cannot accept that there was an evolution at some point, as I would call it, then history, like you just can't do history anymore, because you can posit and speculate anything you want and claim that's the truth, and then dogmatically bind those under you to it, which I think is ridiculous. But otherwise, yeah.
Like they're silent, like the Virgin Mary's Pokemon card collection, right? Like you.
Pretty much.
You said that
pretty much.
Into James White.
That's it. Yeah. Oh man, I forgot. How did I say that again? Pokemon card collection with Mary. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. To be fair, that was a response to Catholic Answers, I think. Where they did an article. I think what was it? There was no evidence. I forgot the exact thing. I think it was there's no opposition to the idea that Mary was assumed into heaven. And then I quote tweeted it and said, well, there's no opposition to the idea that Mary had a Pokemon card collection either, and that doesn't really mean anything. So, I mean, so that's a funny thing I had. But otherwise, yeah, widely with the Seventh Council itself, I think their claims, both theologically and historically, are just false, straight up. And so, given the East's dogmatic adherence to the Second Council of Nicaea, I can't even fathom joining an Eastern church and assenting to that, because I think that that council and their claims are just utterly false and fundamentally damaging to the faith.
Would you like? Do you think it's wrong? Like, I got a couple icons up there. Do you think it's wrong to have those? Like, would they be nowhere in your house?
Here's my answer. Technically not an icon. Well, it's not like a full wood painted one, but technically. Oh, come on, Alan. Why'd you do that to me? but no, to simply have icons, to have imaged pictorial representations of the saints or even Christ himself. No, I'm totally fine with that, because there is a clear conceptual distinction between simply having images and even perhaps having them as like whether it's memory aids or even devotional aids. There is a very clear difference between that and making them as objects of veneration, like you did. So what you did there, I would not do that in an icon. I would not. But otherwise, having an icon here, having my icon of Christ here, which serves to me as a reminder of who I'm doing this all for and who's watching me with everything I do, I think that's very useful, very beneficial. I'd even recommend it to people as long as they don't have a temptation towards idolatry, as I'd call it. So yeah, there's a difference there, and I do believe in that respect. That was the key area of the iconoclasts, where they were just against images, period, which I think is totally wrong. But I think that's a permissible error. Your faith isn't damaged by believing that, although I do believe it's just flat out wrong. Yeah, so that's my take.
So and you think Anglicanism provides the fine balance of
yes, that's right. There's I'm looking at it, I forgot the name, but in the formularies in the 2 books of homilies, there is a specific homily against icon veneration, especially the 7th Council. So if I can just pull it up, that's it. It's called. It's in the 2nd book of homilies, and it's the 2nd homily called against the peril of idolatry, and it does both a theological attack on the issue, but also a large historical one, and in particular, good old. Can't believe I forgot his name. Wow, that's such a good Anglican to me. He goes hard, especially at Empress Irene, who basically made the whole 2nd Council of Nicaea possible, which itself segues into another Eastern issue, which I know you like to talk about a lot, Caesaropapism. But we can get there eventually. But yeah, the Anglican formularies are quite clear on that issue of the 2nd Council of Nicaea is just flat out wrong. We do not assent to it.
Are there some high church Anglicans that ascend to it? I
think so, and they're wrong. They're just wrong. But that's like all the way. That's like very far up the end of like the Anglo-Catholic, if not straight up Anglo-Papalist end of the spectrum. And that position, I believe, is just entirely untenable. Like you can't do
it. We got John Kolarowski here. It says, actually, we share with the Eastern tradition that Saint Luke was an iconographer, but it's just not as pronounced. Well, it's ironic. In 2014, I was in the great nation of Kosovo. And in Kosovo, there's a lot of Serbian monasteries there. And there's this one, I think it's Peš, like P-E-C, pronounced Peš. And it's they claim to have an icon that was made by St. Luke. So I think that's the one they're talking about. Like, and a lot of people go there to like pray before the icon, and I'm sure that just enthralls you, Paul.
Oh yeah, riveting. I'm very convinced by that tradition.
Yeah, no, it's but okay, so all right, we've covered iconography. Now the big one that top apologist Jay Dyer likes to talk about is the essence energies distinction. Sometimes called palimism, although that term is kind of modern. So what is your view on the divine energies, or do you come from a more Thomist tradition, being an Anglican?
I mean, that's another issue that whatchamacallit, that's another issue like the filioque, where I just don't really care a whole ton. But it does become a problem once again with the East, where they assert it in a dogmatic fashion. And where like if you reject the essence energies distinction, atheism, abortion, liberalism, and I just think
sounds like Russia, atheism and abortion.
Exactly.
Like, but then they'll probably country in the world.
But then they'll probably just say something like, "Oh, but that was the West that did that to us." And yeah, co-parter, rightio. But yeah, that's another issue where I haven't looked too much into it, and I just don't. Unlike the filioque, where I personally am against it, but just casually. I don't really have any position on the EE distinction at all, because I don't really care. So yeah, I can't really comment. I can't really comment a whole ton about that, really.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing from my own perspective. Like, I love like learning church history, but when it comes to like in-depth theology, that's beyond my pay grade. Like, I've read Paul Amos's dialogue with the Barlamite. I've read the Triads that Paulus Press puts out. I've heard there's a more complete copy that's published by a monastery somewhere. But
Yeah,
yeah, like
Uncut
that's
Mountain
way
Press.
over my pay grade. I don't. I'm not a. I don't have a lot of interest in theology, save the sacraments. That's kind of the only thing I
Right.
study really. Um, but like it's way over my and like I don't think an average Catholic or Anglican or person who goes to an Orthodox church is like thinking about this. You know, like sure, us online apologetics, you know, that's all we're thinking about. But like the average person in the pews, Catholic, Anglican, Orthodox, is probably not thinking this stuff. And I'm sure if someone who's like a teenager going to an Orthodox church then leaves the faith, it's probably because they just got caught up in the modern world, like most Catholics or Anglicans who would leave, instead of like, oh no, I can't comprehend the divine energies, you know. Uh, yes, okay. All right, we took care of that. Now, you brought up something else, and how the churches, in especially Orthodox churches, are too ethnocentric. Now, in their defense, this is condemned on paper. On paper, this is condemned, but in practice, maybe not as much. Is that what you're getting at?
More or less, yeah. But and then not entirely per se related to that. But you get a very, very strong and dangerous combination of church and state with orthodoxy, which links with the whole Caesar-Papism issue we can get to. But in such a way where it's even manifesting in the Russian-Ukraine war. Like you get Kirill straight up saying, "You fight in the war, your sins are absolved." And I think when I read that, when I heard that announcement, I'm just like, that is disgusting. That is awful. Like just playing. Look at you, just playing. You look at you, just playing the dispensary of salvation to people who fight for Russia. Like that. That is a very awful degree of borderline Erastianism, really. Ironically, because that was a thing that was big in Anglicanism, the whole Erastianism thing. But Orthodoxy, in a large degree, is Erastianism on steroids, in at least historically, and even now in the whole Russian-Ukrainian war. Which is a massive problem because, like, at least with Rome, you've got a pretty clear separation. You do, and historically in the Middle Ages, it was the exact opposite. The Pope was over the Church, which I also have a problem with, but that's a different issue. And so it's oh man, and so it's disastrous in my opinion. Like, and they do interlink up the incestuous relationship of church and state in Orthodox contexts, along with the ethnocentrism issue. Because now
Well,
with
it's
this
not like
Russian
Anglicanism is completely innocent of the church state thing.
oh no, it's not. Historically, it wasn't. Although now it functionally doesn't exist. Like technically,
Yeah.
the King of England, and I'm still getting used to saying that. Technically, he is the head, but for such a long time, what does that mean? It's like purely ceremonial role. So really, Anglicanism doesn't have that issue anymore. Thank God. We have other issues, just not that one. But now that is a perpetually existing problem with Orthodoxy all the way up to this day. Yeah, it's a big one.
Well, and like you talked about the whole Ukraine and Russia, were you talking about like the two patriarchs fighting over Ukraine, or are you talking about the war, or both?
I guess mostly the war, but they're so closely related that they have to be brought up together. Really, it's a massive, massive, massive issue, which speaks against the legitimacy of Orthodoxy's claims, where they have such a fundamental degree of split. In that respect, again, not to just say, oh look, there's a split, therefore debunked or whatever. But it is the nature of the split is happening, and it might be slightly vague, but the nature of the split is happening in such a way which I believe fundamentally calls into question Orthodoxy's orthodoxy's self claims. So that's more or less what I'd say about that.
Well,
and that's just me again. The reason why some of my answers might be slightly vague is because I've been mostly restricting myself just to unique issues I have just with the East, which are there's only a very small number of them, because when I look at Rome in the East, Rome has a lot more stuff, a lot more uniquely objectionable stuff. In that sense, the East is less developed, quote unquote. But if I was to go for the full spectrum of views, and I only wanted to just restrict myself to the East because, like, on your channel, Roman Catholic, I didn't, and I want to be balanced with who I criticize, so I didn't just want to make it a Rome bashing fest. But otherwise, if I expanded it to all my issues with Eastern Orthodoxy, huge laundry list, although a lot of them will be issues that Rome also shares.
Okay, well, like, see, the thing is, like the I think the Ukraine war has kind of accelerated what's going on in the church, because I think now a lot more people are joining up with the Ukrainian church because they're seeing the Russian patriarch as their foreign invader. Like, I'm not saying that's right or wrong or whatnot, but that's how they're seeing it. And, like, I think it's ultimately kind of sad because, I mean, the truth is, if you go to Ukraine, I've been to Ukraine, the churches are pretty much empty there. Like, the two churches are fighting over empty buildings. Like, it's kind of sad. I mean,
that is sad.
Yeah, but as long as it's nationalism, But again, I do concede 100% that is condemned on paper, and so I'm not gonna try to score any cheap shots there. I know it's condemned. Okay, so we covered that. Do you want to talk about the C word, Caesaropapism?
100%, and that's something I guess you can talk more about, because I'm not as versed in it, but the extent of my knowledge really goes into the history part of it, where it's kind of shared with Rome in the East, although like in the end of antiquity and like the very beginning of the Middle Ages, I guess. So like from Constantine up to what's the name again, Irene, and that and I think that is a big problem with at least with Rome. Rome's more or less shed that off, but the East never really shed it off. It only stopped, quote unquote, when the Roman Emperor kind of ceased to be. But I think even then, you like to talk about how like Constantinopolitan patriarchs were appointed by like bloody sultans, and so to that degree, the problem. That's it, and then to that degree, the Caesaro-papal problem of historically in the East is much worse. And because I genuinely believe that there is any secular ruler has absolutely no jurisdiction. Christ never gave any secular ruler any jurisdiction over church affairs, unless like a church is starting to do something that controverts justice. Like if a priest, I don't know, starts a trafficking ring, or if a bishop is starting to ferment an illegitimate rebellion. Those are issues that pertain to the state. The state has every right to do it. And of course, that's not me being a cringe classical liberal, church-state separation, keep your religion out of politics, because it's not the same thing. Not the same thing. It's institutional distinction, institutional separation. The church absolutely has every right and every obligation to preach to the powers and to speak against them when they're doing evil, and even to support the people in resisting those powers when those powers go awry. But with respect to church legislation and church governance, no, the state has no role in that. And unfortunately, the East has even managed to keep that alive even after the loss of the Roman Emperor. We need to, again, only talk back to how the Patriarch Kirill, particularly, with how he's more or less in bed with the Russian government. So that issue, and you like to talk, I'd love to hear you explain that a bit more with how Muslim sultans appointed ecumenical patriarchs. So that is a uniquely big problem with the East, I have.
Well, just hold on a second. I thought, I'm planning on collabing with another Catholic apologist, where I'm going to give a presentation on Caesaropapism, all from primary sources in
Exciting.
the post-schism Byzantine Church. How the emperors would even not only appoint bishops, because that happened in the pre-schism church, but the emperors would decide doctrine, sometimes against the unanimous will of the bishops, and stuff that still persists to this day. A lot of people don't know this, but that's for another time. But let me just quote. This is when the Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror has conquered Constantinople, and this author, who was a Greek, who served in his court as like a biographer. He was on an island that had not been captured, but it essentially surrendered after Constantinople. He goes to Constantinople. He pledges his services to the emperor, the Sultan, and he gets a job there. He writes what happened, but he talks about in 1454 how he found Gennadius Scholarius. It's only 3 paragraphs. During that period, he called back Gennadius, a very wise and remarkable man. He had already heard much through common report about the wisdom and prudence and virtue of this man. Therefore, immediately after the capture, he sought for him, being anxious to see him and to hear some of his wisdom. And after a painstaking search, he found him at Adrianople in a village kept under guard in the home of one of the notables, but enjoying great honors. For his captor knew of his virtue, even though he himself was a military man. When the Sultan saw him and had in a short time had proofs of his wisdom and prudence and virtue, and also of his power as a speaker and of his religious character, he was greatly impressed with him and held him in great honor and respect, and gave him the right to come to him at any time, and honored him with liberty and conversation. He enjoyed his various talks with him and his replies, and he loaded him with noble and costly gifts. In the end, he made him patriarch and high priest of the Christians, and gave him, among many other rights and privileges, the rule of the church. The Sultan is giving this a Christian the rule of the church, and all its power and authority, no less than that enjoyed previously under the emperors. He also granted him the privilege of delivering before him fearlessly and freely many good disquisitions concerning Christian faith and doctrine. And he himself went to his residence, taking with him the dignitaries and wise men of his court, and thus paid him great honor, and in many other ways he delighted the man. I've got another paragraph. Thus the Sultan showed that he knew how to respect the true worth of any man, not only of military men, but of every class, kings and tyrants and emperors. Furthermore, the Sultan gave back the church to the Christians by the will of God, together with a large portion of its properties. I mean, I think you could make an argument. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk argument. I think you could make an argument that makes the Constantinople Patriarch essentially invalid. I think you could make that argument. But like the fact that it's appointed, like we talk about investiture, it's not even a Christian politician doing it, which is problematic enough, but it's it's an Islamic
enemy of the
politician
Christians
for the most important office in the Orthodox Church, the Patriarch of Constantinople. So I mean, I think that's a problem, and I think it only happened because of the pedigree of lay investiture for centuries that I fully concede did go back into the early church. Because you have the pre-schism emperors appointing bishops, and although the Pope of Rome did not like that. He pretty much couldn't do anything about it because it's far away, and like he had an army. The Pope didn't have an army, so
Yeah.
So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, big problem. Really, really, really big problem. Not much really else to not really much else to say about that. Like that's a definitional Babylonian captivity of the church right there. And it perpetuated for such a long period, really. And still managed to get resurrected in like Russia, the Russian government and patriarchate, for example. So yeah,
Well, the
big
fact,
problem.
yeah, like now I'll confess I don't know as much about Russia because although they technically converted around 1,000, they technically converted there. It doesn't take off as a significant, powerful Orthodox empire until about 1400, until it becomes like a huge force. I mean, it's a small force, but keep in mind, you go a bit earlier. They had not all been converted yet. Only it took a while to convert the whole country. And they didn't fully become a power until like 1400s. And keep in mind, that's when Byzantium is pretty much a city state. So like they kind of, I think around this time is when they start talking about Third Rome, how they're the Third Rome. And then that's confirmed when Constantinople signs off on Florence. Okay, they've gone into apostasy with Rome. The true faith is in Third Rome. Again, I'm not an expert in that area though, so I mean, I'm not trying. But in terms of the stuff I'm reading about Byzantium, I'm going to be doing a show with a Catholic apologist. I'm not going to say who.
Ooh.
Okay, all right, here we go. Rome picked popes. Henry
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
appointed.
Yeah. I'm not saying, and
Cranmer.
I'm not denying those problems with Rome exist either. I know that that's a big, big issue for Rome as well. Although I just think there's a unique nature to it with the East. I just wanted to emphasize the unique problems I have with the East. I'm not giving an evaluation of Rome versus the East here. So let's not pretend that. If I was to do that, I would say the similar issue with Rome. Although I do believe it's a unique issue and has been for a long time in the East, where with Rome it hasn't been for a very long time. And so that is a point for Rome over the East. And then, of course, as to Henry VIII appointing Cranmer, yep, cool, that's true. Don't care because we don't make the same claims of being the church, the canonical bounds, bar none, in such a unique way where such things would be an issue for the imperial churches. That's my argument. And so it's still a bad thing. I don't like that a king would appoint a bishop. But it's not for Anglicans. That doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't destroy our worldview.
So you would say that what King Henry did with appointing Cranmer and taking control of the church, separating it from Rome, you would say that that God was using a crooked pen to draw a straight line.
Yeah, crooked stick to draw a straight line. I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's great.
Okay.
Cranmer's awesome.
And in terms of Rome picking popes, I mean, if you go back in the Catholic Church, like by Catholic, let's say the Latin Church, from Constantine to I guess the present day, is there government kind of trying to sink its claws in here and there? Yes, but it's the exception. It's an anomaly in the system. Like in the 10th century, you had the Holy Roman Emperor. That's probably when they had their peak. You had guys like Otto the fourth or fifth. I can't remember the numbers, but like that's probably the closest you have. But in the next century, you have the investiture controversy, where lay investiture is essentially banned. And if you a king and you try to appoint bishops, you get excommunicated and your whole country put on their interdict, and then the country's pretty mad at the king. The king's got to go down to Rome, dress as a homeless person out in the snow and beg for 3 days and 3 nights, like the Holy Roman Emperor did, Henry IV, at Canossa. Okay, so yeah, no, that's
So
a
Rome
fun
at least
topic,
dealt with the
and
problem.
I plan on doing a whole stream on this on a Catholic channel that has more, like, for me, I've got the same amount of viewers as you've caught up to me. We're both at one point.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, you've caught up to me. So, like, I don't have a lot of viewers, but I'm going to go on a channel that has quite a few viewers, and so I'm in the midst of talking with that now. But no, it's something I love. Byzantine history. I love it. I just absolutely love it. There's so many primary sources available in English. There are some that are pretty expensive, but there's some cheap ones too. And yeah, no, there's some juicy stuff there. All right, so we've covered that.
Let's stop giving Craig the limelight now with his comment.
Okay, so is there anything else you want to discuss? Or, well, okay, wait. Something not so much to deal with in terms of Eastern Orthodoxy, but what are your thoughts on the Roman document Apostolicae Curiae?
Cringe, mega cringe.
Yeah, I think the
yeah.
person. Oh, so well, I think the person to talk about this is Father James. He's done a ton of research into this. Like there's a certain argument to be made. There was politics behind it, but I mean that doesn't necessarily mean it's invalid. I mean, in that case, we can't accept. We can't accept Constantinople 553, right? You know, there's
We
politics.
can't accept Nicaea 1.
Yeah, there you go. So okay, so cringe.
Yeah, mega cringe, mega cringe.
Okay, all right. So how about now? Do you have any last words, and then let's open it up to questions?
Yeah, good timing actually, because my lunch is actually almost here, so that's gonna be cool. Last words is that it's, how would I say it? Well, there's many reasons that I do not intend to become East, and most of them are shared with Rome as well. But there are still unique issues with the East that I don't believe Rome shares, at least not to the same extent. So in that regard, I'm very happily Anglican and intend to remain so. But ultimately, the best thing with all these issues is to do what you and I do, Alan Rule, get into them primary sources themselves and actually get a real authentic knowledge on these issues so that we can really make the true good decision on it. Yeah, not really much else to, not really a whole ton else to say about that. Really, it's pretty, I've pretty much said my piece, I guess.
Okay, yeah, no, and this was interesting because I mean, now, like, because of immigration, you know, people in the West have access to Orthodox churches, something they didn't have probably 100 years back. You go 100 years back in Australia and Canada, States, it's essentially Catholic or Protestantism, and yeah, a lot of Protestants don't want to go Catholic, and like I know Father Josiah Trenham, he's an American former Protestant who's now an Orthodox priest. He said it's kind of like an easier transition because I think in the Anglosphere there's a lot of like anti-Catholic sentiment out there. So like it's a lot more natural to go that route. Like I'm not trying to insult that, so I hope no one gets that.
Yeah, just reality. Yeah, I agree.
In some ways, it's an easier transition for people. Yeah. So all right. Questions now. We got our first from Elijah. Did you go over the other Paul's view on the Eucharist? Yeah, but he'll briefly say it again.
Yeah, I briefly touched on it. So, like, I'm kind of open about it that I've been largely Zwinglian, and not just because I passively believe that, but because I genuinely believe that Scripture doesn't really give anything of a real presence in that respect. But now, inspired by there was a recent like casual Twitter space I was in. I've been kind of encouraged to read more on the Calvin view because pretty much all I really knew was just what people would tell me. But I've been encouraged to look more into that because that does actually look more plausible than I initially anticipated. Like, it's not just a text wall of cope and hyperqualification and all that. Like, there is something quite good and simple about it. With respect to how participating in the Eucharist, Christ isn't really present in the elements, but the elements in a way make him present to us, and kind of we feast on him by faith in that respect, which makes a lot of sense with me. And if generally, just to get rid of the stigma of being Zwinglian, I'd be cool if I can be convinced of that view. I'd love that. I would absolutely love that. Otherwise, though, if I was not, I'd gladly wear that stigma of pride. I'd say cope harder, Zwingli's cool. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm kind of slight flux at the moment.
Well, and like well, I appreciate the attention you pay to primary sources. You're like, now I want to actually study the Calvin view from Calvin, or at least faithful disciple of Calvin. Speaking of rating something you don't fully agree with, I notice you have a picture of St. Francis de Sales Catholic controversy on your. Have you started reading that yet? Oh, wait for it.
Indeed, I have.
Oh, and what are your thoughts so
far? Yeah. So the thing about it is, I read it and I see really where Roman apologetics today comes from. At least one of those sources. Like I've heard from what I've read, this wasn't as widespread as Bellarmine's own work, The Controversies. That one was so widely promulgated that there were entire committees for Protestants dedicated to refuting it. Whereas de Sales was more targeted. It was of a specific region. I think it was, what was the region called, Chablais or something like that. In order to convert the Calvinists there. So at least as far as I'm aware, it didn't have as immediate wide appeal, but over time it's become much more appreciated by Romanists. And so, but when I read through it, though, it's like, wow, I can see the origins of many modern Roman Catholic talking points, both pop and advanced. And reading through it, I'm genuinely impressed by the depth and the sharpness of the arguments. It's very good. I ultimately don't agree. And as I've read it, even just without doing a dedicated research time, I've been able to, I believe, poke holes into it. But otherwise, it's a very, very good apologetic. Modern Roman apologetics does not do this justice. This is genuinely impressive stuff. It's worthy of being interrupted.
And the thing is, I don't know if you've ever read a biography of St. Francis de Sales, but when he went to the Chablais, he had Cardinal Bellarmine's books with him. So I think he got a lot of stuff from there that went.
There you go. There you go. So Bellarmine's the ultimate source. I want him. I want it. Because from what I know, Bellarmine wrote 3 books, but only one of them has been translated into English. So that's kind of going to inspire me to get back onto my Latin again so I can read the whole thing.
Well, I know Ryan Grant is trying to translate all of them. He's slowly putting out a book every few months. But yeah, no, I got a few of his books. I love the fact that this stuff's finally coming in. It's a good time to be a scholar, because if this was 150 years back, you need to know Greek and Latin fluently. Now,
and I still encourage that for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and no, on that stream you did with Craig Trulia, where he talked about his new documentary against the papacy, and he tried not to say any material, but he's like, oh, I got quotes that say Pope Adrian said Pope Honorius is a heretic. And then I'm like, oh, Craig, I can do you one better. In the Catholic Controversy, Francis de Sales says Pope Honorius is a heretic. So there you go. That's 1,000 years. That's post Trent, Craig. I hope you've been reading that one.
and you know what's funny? Would you like to know where I got this? I got this at a largely evangelical bookstore, because They do. The vast majority of the stuff, evangelical, even a lot of, unfortunately, uber charismatic, like spiritual books in that. But they have a very impressive academic section. And even though it's quite small, there is a small Roman Catholic section, and this happened to be there. So that's really cool. So when I saw it, picked it up.
Oh, well, praise God. Have you read Bellarmine?
Snippets. Only really snippets.
Okay. Have you changed your mind at all on the Roman question after being exposed to good Catholic apologetics like the book you're reading?
The good old RQ. It has, because this is something I really started, I want to say around 2018, when I was really challenged by a Roman Catholic girl that I knew, or I know rather. And so in all of that, it hasn't flipped me to Rome. It hasn't, nor has DeSales, but it has fundamentally affected my theology in terms of forcing me to look deeper into issues. And in numerous areas, shedding off certain evangelical tendencies of mine. So, in that respect, yes, but ultimately, no.
Oh, wow. No, that's good to hear. All right. The Byzantine Scotus. Have you read Bonaventure or Scotus?
Nah. No.
Okay. You got anything else to say about? Do you plan on reading them?
I guess if like the topic comes up, if it's something I become interested in, I guess. Although I don't really foresee that in the near future.
Okay. No media plans to read. Have you read any medieval stuff like between like say 1,000 and between 1,000 and the Reformation? Have you read Aquinas at all?
Yeah, I have. I've most of my reading on medievals has been pretty fragmentary, so I can say I read, and I really like it, like Aquinas's commentary on Romans 8 and 9. I've read snippets of the Summa. I love. I've read not the whole thing, but big chunks of the section in Chemnitz's Examination of the Council of Trent, Book 2, where he talks about the different definitions of tradition, which I think is really, really good, really worth a read. But I guess bunches of other things, which I just can't remember off the top of my head. Really, because like Middle Ages, at least for the moment, is really not my focus. I'm more into the antiquity side of church history. That's where I'm much more read.
Yeah, like for me, I'm like a medieval guy. Like that's where my stuff comes from. Okay. Now, who is on planet Earth today? Who is the greatest Anglican scholar alive today? Like, who should I go on Amazon and purchase every book?
Oh boy. I mean, in fairness, I'm not really versed in Anglican scholarship per se. Although one really good one I can think of, former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. Unfortunately, he's a liberal, like full on, but he's a more honest, respectable liberal. Even though he supports same-sex marriage and that, he would at least do the thing. At least in the past, he'd be like, "Look, the church's decision is that it's banned, so I'm gonna settle with that." And so, even though he's a liberal, a bad liberal, and in that respect, he's at least got like a bit of an honest streak with him. And he's a good scholar. So I've got his biography of Arius, for example, called Arius, Heresy and Tradition. I'm just looking at it on my shelf behind the computer. And it's really, really good. It's pretty much a one-stop shop for just knowing about the life and theology of Arius. Lots of primary source quotations. So extremely helpful in that regard. There's also, I did recently pick up do I have it? Where is it? Oh, I can't really see it here, but I recently picked up a big tome basically on the history of the English Reformation, which from what I've been told is actually, no, it's right here. I've been told it's pretty much definitive. The best in the subjects. Where is it? Where'd I put it? Just exploring the library really quickly. Not there. Oh, that's weird. I can't find it at the moment. I completely forgot. I think it's called Heretics and something. Let me look up quickly. English Reformation, Heretics and book. That's it. Heretics and Believers by Peter Marshall. So I haven't read through it yet. But from what I've been told, it's fantastic. It's one of, if not the best history of the English Reformation. So I guess I'm aware of that. Otherwise, though, with particular Anglican scholars, apart from that, not very well acquainted. Much more acquainted with evangelical scholarship, so I can name a lot of names there. But yeah.
I've got heretics and believers on my phone here. I got the ebook.
There you go. I was going to say to Byzantine Scotus, a lot of medieval stuff, no apologetic. Middle Age is very religiously homogenous. Yeah, that's true. And that's and I don't want to say that I just read stuff for apologetic purposes. I don't. I genuinely learn many things, and I like that. Apologetics is useful, but it's not the core of it all. So if I'm not reading Middle Ages, it's not because there's not good apologetic material or anything. It's just it's not my area right now. I genuinely love just sober primary source reading, and the key ones for me, of course, and Alan has said it, I'm an Irenaeus stan. That's me. And initially it was apologetic, but it has become like a genuine, I just want to know the thought of Irenaeus. And also First Clement, big First Clement stan. And actually, if you notice, this big bad boy, it's bigger than it looks, this bad boy. Annals of the World by 17th century Anglican Archbishop James Ussher. And it's a thick boy. It is thick. What it is a borderline encyclopedia of world history from creation all the way to the destruction of the Jewish temple. And it discusses all sorts of stuff from Persia, Greece, Rome, you name it. The Jewish wars, of course. And it's fantastic. What's so fantastic about it is that it's basically neatly divided into short paragraphs, at the end of which, I'll show you right here, at the end of which, after every paragraph, it cites the exact primary sources used and that you want to look up for. If I can just get this to focus really quickly.
Cool.
There we go. So if you notice, there's multiple dating systems. It actually lists multiple dating systems simultaneously, like both
JP, AM, and BC.
AM, so AM is Anno Mundi, so from the creation of the world. JP, I forgot exactly what it was, but then it also has the classic BC, and he's constantly referencing dating systems according to the reigns of various kings. And if you notice that every paragraph, there's in italics little references to primary sources you can find. And this specific edition updates the English to a more modern English, but also updates the primary source references mostly to Loeb Classical Library editions of those sources. So if you want to study a historical topic that's within the period of this book, this can be like a first stop. Just go to it, find the period, and at least find an initial set of sources. And this book, I'm actually intending, hopefully, to start recording it today. But I want to start a semi-regular series of short videos called Recommended Sources, where I basically get good books from my library and I recommend them to people and I describe them and their contents and features and that. And this is going to be the first one of those because it is freaking awesome. It is really, really cool.
Okay. Now, like I asked you, the greatest Anglican scholar, who is your favorite? Who's your favorite Eastern Orthodox scholar alive today?
Probably. I don't know a whole ton, but because I'm using him right now for my stuff on Irenaeus, probably Father John Bear. So he's written a whole short thing just on Irenaeus, his thought and life and that. And it's really good, really useful. And I do like him quite a bit. I've seen other things by him, and he's very respectable.
Okay. All right. Do you know about Jack Bull's arguments against the authenticity of Ignatius's middle recension?
I don't. I'm not majorly acquainted with the debates on the recensions of Ignatius. I think the middle recension is I think that's the main one used. Like I've got my collection of the Apostolic Fathers here by Michael Holmes, the latest edition. And I think that does use the middle recension. I haven't heard the arguments against the middle recension. I have read various older sources who wrote arguments against the authenticity of the epistles, period. And I think they're pretty bunk. But no, I haven't read that. I don't even know who Jack Bull is.
Oh, okay. John, hi. Okay, that's not for you. The other Paul, what do you think of Irenaeus' Mariology? It seems to me it leans towards Mary as co-redemptrix. I'm sure you have nothing to say about that at all.
Yeah, absolutely nothing. No, that's not something in Irenaeus I've long looked at, but I have, having read like the majority of Against Heresies, and I tend to fully read it again and again and again. From what I know, he does describe her as pretty much like the instrument through which our salvation came, which in that kind of devotional aspect, absent the context of modern day debates about Mariology, and that I don't have any issue with it at all. The only reason why I would find such language problematic now is because of the nature of these debates, and that such language is so associated with high Mariological views. But otherwise, absent that context, like in the time of Irenaeus in particular, I don't remember the exact reference, but I know kind of. I think I know the passage that Gideon's thinking of.
Yeah, so
It's
do
not
I.
problematic in itself. I'm cool with it. I personally wouldn't talk about it that way just because of our context today. But otherwise, I'm fine with it in that respect.
At a certain point, the late Middle Ages, the emperor received certain official rights over the Byzantine. Oh yeah, I know, I know. Yeah, no. A lot of interesting stuff there. You and Swan. Okay, they're talking with each
Ooh.
other. I was supposed to stream today, but my guest was sick. Oh, I think I know who your guest was because I know someone who's sick right now. Is that the same
Ooh.
person who's currently has an ear infection?
Oh man, pray for Wagner, people. Pray for him.
Yeah, I didn't want to say his name, but okay, yeah. Pray for
That's
Wagner.
public.
It's in the Greek Hats of Florence where John VIII is constantly acting like the. Yeah, no, the emperor was in charge of the post-schism Orthodox Church. He played the role of pope. I'll say that boldly. Um, the Byzantines, hell, okay. Oh, I didn't even know Father James is here. Why did you join a church that was started by a king who wanted to start a? Oh, you've been stumped by barely
I'll tell
Protestant.
you why, mate. Because I want to get a divorce. That's right, cope and seethe.
Okay, the mid or ascension is currently widely accepted, but Jack Bull makes argument for the shorter ascension. The arguments are pretty good.
Okay.
I'm not a. I'm completely unfamiliar with like the scholarship on the like that.
I'm gonna look it up now.
That's not my area of expertise personally. Like, don't get me wrong. I've read that and I love it. But like I've not read the scholars. I don't know who has this view, who has challenged it. Does academia side with this guy or that guy or whatever?
Hmm.
I in terms of that kind of scholarship, I'm not sure. What does the other Paul believe about the Blessed Mother? Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, I guess where to start. Clearly the most blessed woman in human history, and thus
Amen.
deserves a high respect in that regard. I don't like the theology. Again, absent the controversies. If we weren't having these issues now, if everyone was just a good Protestant and didn't have such high Mariological views, then there wouldn't be an issue with like in like a spiritual or analogical sense thinking of her as like the mother of all because that's simply a reference to the fact that she gave birth to the Savior. The problems I have and why I wouldn't say that now is because of the other implications that such language as her of a mother has. So I believe supremely blessed more than any other human, period, by Jesus himself, of course, because he was human. So that, nonetheless, still one inherent with the effects of sin, and I do believe would have and possible references in scripture did commit sin in her life. So in that respect, no different to us. But otherwise, of course, ultimately saved by God's grace. And that was simply guaranteed. That was simply guaranteed because she was the chosen vessel of the Savior.
Saved by God's grace, amen. Like I like to say, that immaculate conception didn't do itself. Okay. I think Wagner
Oh,
has
that's
a
gonna be
debate
great.
soon with
I cannot wait for that.
the debate with Ubi. Well. Hopefully, he doesn't have to cancel. Hopefully, this ear infection goes away. Okay. It turns out he was going to have Thomas Ward on. I don't know who that is. You have to get into the bowels of Revue des Etude Byzantine to figure out what the emperor was or wasn't allowed. I'm pretty sure I have an idea after I've read quite a bit of the primary sources. Like he's like, according to Anna Komnena, she calls her dad the high priest. She calls him the 13th apostle. She's like, you could argue that Constantine could be called that too. And all right, everyone buy Thomas Ward's new book, Ordered by Love, Introduction to John Duns Scotus. I'll be doing a chapter breakdown of it. Resume streaming. Is that in the Discord or on the channel? Anyway, I agree. I think the mineral ascensions are the most accurate. Does anyone know where Wagner and Ubi will debate? I'm just hoping it's still on.
I think it'll be on Ubi's channel. I think maybe.
The other Paul, which Marian dogmas do you accept? Oh, that's an interesting question.
I accept none of them. Yeah, but otherwise, to kind of give a more full out answer in terms of like, if a Protestant believed, if I knew a Protestant who believes in the perpetual virginity, I wouldn't bat an eye. It's possible. Like, I still think there may be some key references in Matthew in particular that may speak against it. But I recently picked up Richard Borkham's book, Jude and the Relatives of Jesus in the Early Church, which is a fairly comprehensive look at the issue. And potentially I may be swayed to think that, because he likes to divide it into three hypotheses. So the Helvidian view, Mary had biological children; the Epiphanian view, where they were children of Joseph's past marriage; and the Hieronymian view, or Jerome view, that they were his cousins. Borkham says that Jerome's view is very clearly no and very ad hoc. But Borkham otherwise says that the Helvidian and the Epiphanian views are equally plausible. And if I was to be persuaded otherwise from those certain passages in Matthew, then maybe I'd be in agreement with that. And so otherwise, if the... Oh, sorry, Belly Protestant. Yes, the Theotokos. Mary is Theotokos. Yes. I do accept that. Bad blunder on my part. Of course I accept that. Yes, she is. 100%. I forgot.
She's the Theotokos.
I forgot that was a dogma. Oh, I forgot that was a dogma.
Wait. You mean you don't believe in that Mary at the end of her earthly life was assumed into heaven to be united with her divine son? You don't believe that?
Assumed into heaven, bodily assumption? No, I don't. Okay. But yeah, anyway, to TLDR, if a Protestant accepts the perpetual virginity, cool, whatever. I wouldn't bat an eye. There may be historical precedent for it.
So the Immaculate you have the same attitude. You have the same attitude then as the essence energy distinction and the filioque then, right?
What do you mean? Oh, like yeah. Same attitude. Yeah. Same attitude in that one. Immaculate conception, I'm very convinced against. I believe there's some flawed theological foundations for that one. But otherwise, if another Protestant did accept that, I would raise an eyebrow. And I'd say that they probably have some pretty flawed presuppositions, but otherwise it's not going to damn them or anything up. So otherwise, in that respect, not the worst issue. Theotokos, true, 100%. Mary is Queen of Heaven. That's, my memory is screwed right now because I've got a little bit of a headache. That's a dogma, I assume.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah. That one I am very that's bad. I genuinely believe that does function.
Well, correction. It's Queen of Heaven and Earth. It's Queen of Heaven and Earth.
Oh, great. And Earth. Fantastic. So I genuinely believe that dogma is wrong. If another Protestant affirmed that, I'd say, bro, you are in big, big danger. Because I do believe that is a functional deification.
Ooh. All right. Have you changed your views on young Earth creationism since you've started using Usher?
Usher is uber base in this question. The young Earth issue is yet again another one of those issues where I don't care a whole ton. So I don't really have honestly, I've just stopped having a view on that issue at all. So I don't know when I'll revisit it. Yeah, he doesn't. Jerome doesn't have the best biblical view.
Paul only believes in the Christ.
The other Paul's an historian. He believes in Christotokos. Is that's the vision of the divine natures.
Oh! You got to. Do you think some of your views are at odds with Jimmy White?
Papa White. I can't. How can I? I shudder at the thought of disagreeing with Papa White. No. Of course not. He's a cessationist. That's cringe. I hate that. I despise. I'm totally against cessationism. It's
That's
wrong.
cringe.
Straight up wrong.
And you're gonna have
he, I
Dr.
believe,
White.
affirmed limited atonement, and I kind of doubt that. I strongly doubt limited atonement at the moment. Other things. I'm very sympathetic with a lot of his recent critiques of Protestants trying to give church tradition such a level which I think is like just basically canceling people who are critical of it. I think he's very right on those things, but I do suspect that he may have a slightly less than warranted view of church traditions. So that might be another area of conflict. And infant baptism, that's another one. Yes, Father James mentioned he opposes infant baptism, and I'm for that.
Well, yeah, no, I think I'd actually like to see a conversation between someone like Father James and James White, because I mean,
Ooh.
like he's like, you know, like a pretty high church Anglican, has a lot of respect for the fathers and even the medieval church, but again, he's not saying they're like the infallible autocrats. Like certainly a lot more respect for him than say James White, but like, yeah, no, I think that would be an interesting discussion. All right, who is more theological accurate, James White or James Martin? Oh my. Next, okay, what happened to Queen of Heaven?
Well, for one, James Martin's a Romanist. So that's not to mention his debauchery, his affirmation of debauchery. So the
question's for both of you.
That'd be interesting for you.
Okay, on the issue of the acronym community, James White is 1,000 times more based on the acronym community. All right. LOL, that was good. The other Paul, what are your thoughts on Petrology Valtori's expedition of Venerable Saints in church history? All right, take it away.
I remember that. I think that was a thread he did a while ago. I don't know if I went through it, and I don't know if I analyzed it, because the precise history of veneration of the saints I don't think is one I looked greatly at. Although I do think with his method, where he very much too strongly gives too much power to an alleged consensus in much, much later periods, more than I think is historically warranted, because it functionally allows anyone to pick and choose, this time in this century there was a consensus, therefore it's true historically. It's like, I think there is a bit of arbitrariness with that. Other than that, not very many thoughts.
All right. Question from Scotus. What do you think of James Jordan and Peter Lightheart and the Theopolis Institute?
Theopolis Institute, I've seen a lot of good things from them. Otherwise, and I remember one really good article that I'm still trying to find, where they basically attacked economical Eucharist, where it's like in most evangelical churches, you get like a little disposable cup and a little wafer, and they just try to get through the Lord's Supper like as quick as possible, which is just absolutely silly and stupid, because it's supposed to be a centerpiece of the whole service. And so that was a brilliant article. I'm still trying to find it again. Otherwise, I don't know too much about James Jordan and Peter Lightheart personally.
He who has not Mary for his mother has not God for his father. This is the reason why heretics men hate the Blessed Lady, regard her of, okay, yeah, base.
Yeah, that's slander.
As a Catholic, you say Jimmy Muhammad White. Let's have a debate between barely Protestant and James White.
Sancte Jacobe Albe, ora pro nobis.
This would be a good
debate. For those plebs who don't know Latin, I said St. James White, pray for us.
Oh, old Jimmy. And tell everyone you're going to have Jimmy on your channel.
That's right. A few days from now, having James White himself on the channel to talk about the beauty of divine election. It's going to be a differently oriented one. I like to do interviews that are different from what most people are doing. So the vast majority of stuff on this is like exegetical and theological arguments for why monergism is true, debunking Arminians and all that jazz, which is something we can come together on if you're a Thomist, because that's Thomism as well. But This is specifically going to be oriented towards the emotional angle on the issue, basically trying to remove the emotional impediment that many people have against that's, let's be real, that's pretty much the ultimate reason why many people oppose monergism, is because it emotionally just feels very bad. Like, how can God damn some people and all that, and like they don't have free choice and all that jazz? Oh, the horror, kill me now. But we're going to be going at it from a very sympathetic angle to try and get rid of that emotional rut and help people see the real beauty of divine election. So it's going to be a very good stream.
All right, with Jimmy White. All right, ask TOP how the Bills blew the game against the Vikings.
Yeah, honestly, the Bills, that defense was absolutely shocking. Like, what was up with their lead players absolutely losing, just losing any sense of skill, and just even allowing the worst of the Vikings guys just to absolutely swamp it with them. That was just absolutely pathetic. The coach needs to be fired.
All right.
By the way, I have absolutely no idea what that was, so I just made that up.
Well, this is American football. If you watch the epic rap battles of history with Ragnar Lothbrok against Richard the Lionheart, they make a reference to the Minnesota Vikings. I pray James Martin goes home to the Anglican Church.
Shut your fat mouth, mate.
He won't. He's going to stay in the Catholic Church because he's.
No, I will.
Like,
because the hierarchy is not doing anything about it. Why would he leave?
Yeah, exactly. They're feeding the beast and not poison. They're feeding him like growth hormones. You know, Theopolis Institute's pretty good. Paul, I'll send you a big Theopolis reading list. You got a reading list coming your way. Alan, should react to James White versus Lutheran wars? I would side with Lutherans because my dad's technically a Lutheran, non-practicing. Both of my grandparents on my dad's side died as practicing Lutherans. And I'll say this, I find Martin Luther's writings very entertaining. All right. That's a whole different rabbit hole. The other, Paul, what's your opinion of Reformed Anglicans and Anglo-Catholics being in communion despite their different views of the Lord's Supper? Or is it, I think we covered on this, but if you want to talk some more about this again.
I think many issues of disagreement, for me, even if they seem significant, they can have significant implications. It's like, look, ultimately, it's not a deal breaker. As long as what matters is that I think local churches do need to have a settled opinion on like theological particulars. It's entirely possible and fruitful to have multiple churches in communion that may have theological disagreements to a certain extent. And so I think this is one where it's like Anglo-Catholics almost certainly disagree. But I'd say that if you say have like those with the Calvinist view on one end and then those with a borderline transubstantiation on the other, I don't see an issue other than the fact that the near transubstantiation view is wrong. But about the fact of them being in the same communion, not really a fuss. And the only problem would arise if well, I mean, really, it's a reality for virtually every communion out there. Like, you can point to major disagreements in Rome, the East, and all, and we're talking about the East disagreements today. But they'll ultimately still say, but we have agreement on paper. Okay, we still have technically an official position, even if we kind of disagree on how that fleshes out. To which I would simply say, well, that's the same with Anglicanism. We have agreement on paper on the issues where that paper talks about, and so that's ultimately what matters, and ultimately. Whether it's an issue or not is going to be to whether those guys in the communion think it's an issue. And so if Anglo-Catholics and Reformed Anglicans disagree on the issue, but they mutually agree that they can respect each other, then there's no problem. No problem at all.
Good fluff. Who's the better Episcopalian, Michael Kerr? Oh, Pope Francis, obviously.
Nelly.
I hope Jimmy Martin goes back home to eternal fire. Well, that's where he's headed unless he repents. I'm sorry. But that man is a
Trent Horn did a very good takedown of his website recently. That was a very good one.
I'm curious, how long ago was this?
Only a day or two ago, he uploaded like a 20-minute refutation.
Okay, because
pretty good.
I listened to one he did like last year, but no, I'll check that one out. Sorry, just started watching. Why aren't Anglo-Catholics just Lutheran?
Still some key differences. High liturgy doesn't mean Lutheran. High liturgy without a pope doesn't equal Lutheran.
apostolic succession and Anglicans have a better. Is it better than the Eastern Orthodox? Keep in mind the Eastern Orthodox liturgy hasn't changed since about 87 AD, right? Right? That's about when they.
Oh yeah, it's bro. They've had the same liturgy since 6000 BC. It's never changed ever. So yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Lutheran, you guys don't believe how. Oh, okay, that's for barely Protestant. Thoughts on Father Chad Repaja? For both.
I know of him and I like his name, but otherwise I have no idea else about him.
You know, I'm very underread on Father Repager, and it's odd because because all my friends quote him. Timothy Flanders quotes him constantly. Like at church, people quote him constantly. But like I'm kind of underread. I don't like to read much modern authors. Like for example, Craig Trulley and I are going to be debating the Acts of the Council of Lateran 649, and I like the fact that it's like an ancient. I don't know. Is this ancient or medieval?
What council is this?
The Council of Lateran 649.
Okay, yeah. Generally, it's pretty rough. There's not really a consensus on when the Middle Age antiquity becomes Middle Ages, but roughly the period, the time I hear brought up is like the fall of Rome, so 476 technically.
Okay, so I mean, like this, I like this, but the commentary by this rank heretic and modernist, Father Richard Price, that's like I'd rather.
His
like,
criticisms of the Second Council of Nicaea sound very like he sounds Protestant with how much he criticizes that council, like straight up saying the iconoclasts had history on their side.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Adam condemned Arius in the garden. Yeah, 100%. That's what I was going to say. 100% true. Unironically, the Book of Common Prayer, 1662, best liturgy, hands down.
It's better than the NOUS.
It's better than the NOUS.
All right. When will you renounce Protestantism? Well, not on this stream.
When men can get pregnant.
Oh. They didn't transfer bishops over to the U.S. That's why they largely don't have it. Okay, he's talking about the Lutherans. Is there a place for monastic life in Anglicanism? I think there are some super high Anglican groups that have tried to bring back monasticism, like in the 19th century, because of course King Henry VIII looted all the monasteries, so that was the end of monasticism in England. But like I think during the Oxford movement, there was some. Well, do you want to say anything about it?
I guess there is a place. I haven't studied monasticism much myself, but I don't see properly regulated. I don't see an issue with it.
All right. Okay, that's for yes, we have monastics. Yeah, so I think there are some Anglican monastics. County angels can fit on the head of a pin.
Yes.
Do you like Dumb and Dumber?
I noticed your profile pic there. That movie, notwithstanding certain kinds of humor in it, I love it. It's hilarious. The sequel sucked. I watched that in New York, and it sucked.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that funny, to be honest.
The original or the sequel?
The first one.
Oh, you're lame. Hey, you want to hear the most annoying noise in the world?
All right. The East has the best liturgy. The question is, what East? There's a lot of Eastern.
Yeah, what East? Ooh, snap.
Coptic liturgy.
Snap, Queen.
Why do Anglicans venerate John Fisher and Thomas More?
Yeah, good question. Good question. Flipping, what's his name? Flipping Welby, the spineless Archbishop of Canterbury. Like, what's wrong with him?
Well, a lot of things are wrong with him.
I think a lot of things are wrong.
Okay, lame. Seems kind of inconsistent. Yeah, that's true. Well. Keep in mind, there are this has to go back to Caesaropapism, but there are saints in the Eastern Orthodox Church who are saints only because they were royalty. Like their lives were completely sinful. They're like Justinian's wife Theodora is a saint, and she spent her whole life promoting the monophysite heresy. Like her whole life, she would would build the monasteries for the monophysite monks. She would send the monophysite missionaries to Chalcedonian areas. Like, and she's a saint in the Orthodox Church and the Coptic Church, which makes sense. But like, it's just because they're part of the imperial structure. Okay. Do you have any? I think we will wrap things up. Do you got any final words? And have you got anything on the go now? I know you got.
Yeah. I've got actually a big number of things coming up. So more focus now on my channel of getting back to pre-recorded, high-quality videos. Aiming for every fortnight at least, but possibly more frequent if I can do that. But also, I've got some good collabs. So, of course, the James White interview in a few days. That's going to be epic. After that, I've got a number of things lined up. So actually, there is a proper Assyrian Church of the East goer in my Discord server. Really good guy, very well learned on that. And I've proposed to him an interview on the Assyrian Church of the East and their things. And he's down for that. So that's going to be happening either this month or next month. Also with Seraphim Hamilton, Cabane, we're going to be actually doing a collab critiquing Mormonism of all things, because I just came up to him and said, hey, I want to collab with you again. Like, what's something that you're big into studying right now? And he said Mormonism. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, that came out of nowhere. And he has a Tumblr blog in it, and it's really, really deep. So that's going to be cool as well. Also a collab with Codex Justinianus, because he is doing work on, I can't give any more details, but he's doing work on Second Clement. So we're going to be doing a stream discussing that, its relation to First Clement, Shepherd of Hamas, and historical issues around that. So that's going to be epic. And probably a bunch of other floating ideas out there coming down the line. So yeah, get hyped. There's a lot of good stuff happening. And
you've got a website, right?
That's right. Center of operations, really, the otherpole64.com. It's where the blog is. It has links to all my major platforms. Yeah, it's where the fun happens. And I have, by the end of the month, a major essay on Irenaeus's view of apostolic tradition and the rule of faith coming out. So that's going to be epic. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Paul. And yeah, hopefully we can do this again. It's always fun. And
100%.
Stay safe there down in the southern colony there. I'm in the northern colony under King 100%. Charles's dominion. And
always an honor to collab with you, Alan. It's always great.
Yeah. All right. Later, bro. God bless.
Later. See you all.